Good morning. Welcome to Kalam IS Academy. In the another series of NewsKase, today we will be talking about inflation and monetary policy in India. This topic, which has large coverage from the newspapers along with the political and economic discussion, let's see what we're going to cover in this segment. The sources will be from the Hindu, the Indian Express, and the news was also in the Economic Times. Along with it, the syllabus from GS paper 3 aspect, the money and banking perspective where largely questions are coming. Along with it, the current to static part where we will be connecting the current affairs news with the static part of inflation, key concepts, the monetary policy aspect and the analysis aspect into it. And then the importance that every year almost one question in the prelims examination is coming from the topic. Also, the another part of discussion will be the key points from the news and the important key terminologies and qualitative analysis of the entire topic. So, this will be the part of discussion today in our NewsKase series. So, let us start with that. These were certain news which were largely there. One is from the Hindu, another is from the Indian Express. That says RBI MPC keeps repo rate unchanged at 6.5%. It was in the Hindu, and the retail inflation is just to 5.0%. The IIP output hits 14-month high, and the Indian Express report was that. And with that, the topic of discussion will be inflation and monetary policy in India. So now to start with certain key components, the important terms related to inflation from the exams perspective will be covered. Along with it, inflation and its causes, and then the basic definition of inflation. Inflation is nothing but the persistent increase in prices of goods and commodities in a specified period of time, that is inflation, price rise. Furthermore, the measurement of inflation, important indices and inflation targeting will be another part of discussion, and then we will talk about the monetary policy committee and certain limitations, way forward, and overall the answer sheet points from Kalam IS will be available for you in the end of the discussion. So, let us see what we are going to discuss today. Inflation, we have just said the price rise is inflation. The scope of discussion, first discussion will be inflation versus disinflation. Inflation, when there is a price rise in the commodities, especially the goods, within a specified period of time, whereas disinflation is there is a percent decrease or decrease in rate of inflation. So, what inflation is? Price rise, and deflation is there is a decrease in rate of inflation. For say, if some commodities was of rupees 100, the rise was 50 and it become of 150. Now the rise is of 30. So now we see it is becoming costlier, but the rate is decreasing. So that shows disinflation. Apart from it, the deflation and the reflation, when there is a decrease in prices of the commodity, then it is called deflation. You have seen many news related to China that China is facing deflation in their economy. We will be talking about that also in this discussion. Then the reflation, when after a decrease in the prices start increasing, that is termed as reflation. Certain more key concepts, the base effect that shows the impact on the price level based on the prices in previous years. That means base effect is the प्राइसेस बेस ईयर के प्राइसेस और रेफरेंस ईयर के प्राइसेस की वजह से जो इन्फ्लेशन बढ़ गई होती है उसको हम बेस इफेक्ट कहते हैं. सो इट इज सिंपली impact of the price levels of the previous year on the calculation of inflation rate is base effect. This was one question in prelims examination. Furthermore, there is a condition called stagflation where the economy is stagnant and the inflation is rising at the same time. That shows with rising inflation there are chances of increased unemployment in the economy. So that is stagflation. Along with it, there are certain more key definitions. One is inflation spiral, These are certain key concepts which you need to develop from the news perspective, from the perspective of your examination. So the prices are increasing, along with it the wages are also increasing. That shows that although the wages are increasing, the impact of the inflation is impacting the prices of commodities. So wage के साथ आपका prices भी बढ़ रहे हैं. That shows inflation spiral. The misery index, when in calculation of inflation the unemployment rate is also added, then that is termed as misery inflation. That is how rising inflation is also impacting the employment aspect, the growth aspect in the economy also, and well-being of the people also. Then there is another context, that is inflationary gap. That shows the increase in aggregate demand as compared to the actual production in the economy. So that shows there is less production than aggregate demand, that is inflationary gap. और इसी का उल्टा deflationary gap की अगर हम बात करें, so deflationary gap is a condition where the production is more but aggregate demand is less. So that is deflationary gap. So these are certain key concepts which you need to understand from the inflation perspective in the NewsKase aspect. Now I'll move ahead towards the inflation and types and factors a bit, and based on the discussion we will be discussing the news further. The reasons behind inflation. First is demand pull inflation, and simple understanding, when there will increase in demand that will further pull the inflation. That shows disposable personal income is increasing and that is increasing the demand of the people. Simple, DPI increases, this increases the demand of the people, and this process decreases the purchasing power, and because of that somewhat prices are rising. Then there is cost push inflation, that is due to the supply side constraints and structural changes in the economy. Global externalities भी हो सकती है, जिससे global input commodities के prices बढ़ गए हैं, that will further lead to increase in the prices of finished goods also. Furthermore, the core inflation, where the volatile items like food items and other items which are very volatile in nature like crude oil and other things will not be included, and then inflation is calculated, then that is called core inflation. The another type of inflation, that is headline inflation, that is the total inflation in the economy where the volatile elements are also being counted, and largely the India is calculating the headline inflation and RBI is also targeting this headline inflation. And then there is Phillips curve which shows the inflation and unemployment aspect, where with increase in inflation there is less unemployment, that is the context. That shows inflation is inversely proportional to unemployment. So it shows both the connotations, positive and negative at the same time, because in two ways. First, that shows a moderate inflation will increase the demand in the economy. Further economic activity will help in job creation and other aspects, so unemployment will be low. At the same time, if inflation is higher, people will further look more towards either meeting their rising demands or they will strict down their demands. Both the things are there. Now the news which is important from the perspective of yours, that is the RBI MPC keeps repo rate unchanged at 6.05%, 50%, sorry. Then the RBI kept repo rate unchanged fourth consecutive time at 6.50%. The real GDP growth forecast retained at 6.5% for 25 financial year 24. Also, the inflation forecast is too retained at 5.4%. So three major important data. One is fourth consecutive time the repo rate is same. So another thing is जो growth prospect है, that is also 6.50. Third thing is 5.4% रखा गया है आपके financial year के aspects को. So repo rate is 6.50 and other aspects have been furthermore. अब ये जो कूल डाउन हुआ है, बिकॉज दे वर लार्जली एक्सपेक्टिंग कि लार्जर रहेगा, बट कूल डाउन दो वजहों से हुआ है. पहली चीज तो जो वेजिटेबल प्राइसेस हैं वो जो डाउन हुए हैं वो, और कट इन एलपीजी rates has also reduces the cost of production of goods to a larger extent. at home or at shops also. Then the third part is RBI has plans to undertake open market operation with regard to government securities to manage liquidity. Liquidity manage करने के लिए they will opt for OMO, not for other options that RBI is keeping from a longer period of time, and this will be via auction mode. Furthermore, RBI identifies high inflation as major risk to macroeconomic stability and sustainability of the economy. So तीन चार aspects यहाँ से आए, and the scope of discussion from this topic will be largely, first thing is repo rate. What is repo rate? That should be one part you should understand. Apart from it, the real GDP growth prospect, that is also needs to be discussed. Inflation forecast 5.4%. Another part is the open market operation that we needs to discuss, and how high inflation is a major risk to macroeconomic stability and sustainable growth will be scope of discussion from this topic. With that, the first part, repo rate, is a repurchase option that is called repo, and the rate on which the repurchase option is being decided is known as repo rate. Simply, the bank takes loan RBI against the government security on a particular rate, and that rate is called repo rate. And based on that, बैंक के साथ जो लिक्विडिटी होती है that is being decided. If repo rate is less, that is also called policy rate. So bank will also reduce its lending rates to an extent, and that will further benefit the customers. So it is something which starts from the RBI and goes down to the customers to benefit the customers, or also to accommodate the money supply in the market. So two things are there. This repo rate is largely being utilized to regulate the money supply, either to expand it in the market or to contract it in the market. So these are the two segments from the repo rate aspect. Now the real GDP is a GDP which is based on the base year where the inflation is being adjusted. इन्फ्लेशन को एडजस्ट करेंगे तो रियल जीडीपी होगा, और बेस ईयर होता है, रेफरेंस ईयर होता है, that is 2011 and 12 at the moment. Now we need to understand this context of real GDP, that real GDP is currently calculated at market price that we have discussed. The market price is the price on which an item is being sold. So based on that, the real GDP is being calculated, and the base year for is 2011 and 12. That shows from the reference year the economy has grown till 6.5% or something like that. That is the major assumption from there. So real GDP growth will be retained at 6.5%. Third part of the discussion, the inflation forecast, which will be retained at 5.4%. This is the headline inflation, which is being calculated nowadays based on CPI, that is Consumer Price Index. Based on this, the inflation is being counted, and this is also called as the retail inflation. This will be another scope of discussion for us. Apart from it, now the another part within the discussion is the open market operation. This open market operation you need to understand to provide liquidity aspect to whom? Government. What RBI does on the behalf of government, it sells the government securities to the banks, and the operation is called as open market operation. Government will give the government security to RBI. This RBI will give this government security to bank, for example 10 crore. So this will be done by auctioning. Bank will give almost 10 crore. Sometimes there is a discount to the RBI, and then RBI will give it to government. So this government security of 10 crore will be held with bank, and the 10 crore will be given to government, so that the liquidity management for the government can be made possible. So open market operation is for the prospect of buying and selling the government securities by RBI, by RBI for the government's purpose to an extent. So that is open market operation. Now, how RBI identifies high inflation as major risk to macroeconomic stability and sustainable growth, that we will discuss further. Apart from it, certain key components from here. The India's industrial output has jumped to 14-month high, that is a very significant 10.3% का increase और growth देखा गया है, and in the August with an uptick in the sectors like manufacturing, mining, capital goods and consumer durables. Post this, the CPI customer retail inflation जिसको भी कहते हैं 3-month low 5.02%. There is a sharp moderation due to food prices and LPG prices cut. That is another part from the news. Furthermore, why this IIP has increased, reasons are here. The primary infrastructure construction and capital goods have recorded a double-digit growth rate, and because of that, this double digit of growth in August has been seen of 10.3%. For example, 12.4% primary articles में 14.9% is infrastructure or construction and 12.6% in capital goods. Post this, while the retail inflation is below the RBI's upper limit of 6%, a gap of 2 months, the headline inflation remains higher than the stated monetary target of 4%. That means 4% is the target, but एक हम expanded limit लेते हैं जिस limit is 4 plus minus 2%, tolerance limit जिसको हम बोलते हैं. So that tolerance limit के उसमें है, although 4% से ज़्यादा ये 5.04% है, and the core inflation or non-food or non-fuel inflation has however eased to 3.5 years low, that is less than 4%. So that is a good thing. यहाँ से कॉन्टेक्स्ट में अगर हम देखें तो हमें कुछ इंपॉर्टेंट की पॉइंट्स समझ में आते हैं जिसको अभी हमने डिस्कस भी किया, और वो की पॉइंट्स हैं, जस्ट अ मिनट, यस, दिस पार्ट एंड दिस पार्ट विल बी बेटर हेल्पिंग यू आउट. फर्दर, now we need to understand the scope of discussion related to inflation more. What are the positive impacts of inflation? If inflation is moderately increasing, so what are those positive impacts? First such positive impact is a moderate inflation will stimulate the economic growth, will help in the economic growth. Furthermore, it increases the positive margins of the firms. Positive margins, that means profits will increase because they will add on the value into their products and they will increase the profit margins. Also, it increases the productivity or production and supply at the same time because demand is rising in the market. And what it does, it helps in rising investment and productivity, and further all this will lead to economic growth. If there is rise in the prices, that is inflation. If there is moderate rise in the prices of goods and commodities, that shows prosperity in the economy is increasing, and based on that the prices of commodities are also rising, the cost of living is rising, but at the same time the purchasing power capacity of the individual is also rising. So somewhat these are certain positive impacts which you can mention. Now we need to understand these are the positive impacts, but what are the adverse impact of inflation? So for adverse impact of inflation, let's see what it is. If inflation is rising to a larger segment, it will reduce the real income. Real income, the actual income which occurs after all the deductions to an extent. And when the real income decreases, your saving capacity will also decrease. And if the saving capacity will decrease, it will further decrease the investment and capital formation aspect. Because saving ही नहीं होगी तो investment कहाँ से आएगी, capital formation कहाँ से होगा, banks के end पे भी ये problem create होगी. Furthermore, when there is real interest rate will decrease, so there will be two things. Real interest rate means, for say we do the saving account, we do have fixed deposit accounts. Saving पे 3 to 4% मिल रहा है, fixed deposit पे 6 to 8% मिल रहा है for say. But these are the nominal interest rate. Real interest rate तब आएगा जब आप inflation को adjust करेंगे. Inflation means rising prices को adjust करेंगे. So एक actual estimation अगर हम inflation को adjust करने के बाद देखते हैं, so we are actually getting 1% or sometimes 0% or negative also. So because of that, the saving interest of the consumers or the mindset of consumers get a negativity that financial assets में invest करना is not profitable, so they start doing their investments in the physical assets like land or gold assets or etc. Because this real interest rate decreases, it decreases their willingness to save, and this further add-ons in two things. First thing is their saving capacity decreases, further जो financial और capital formation होगी वो decrease होगी. So they stop doing the financial investments, that will decrease, and the investment is physical assets increase जो immobile होती है जैसे कि land, gold, which will not be further utilized in the process of economic development or economic activity. For example, you have bought a land, now it is stagnant, प्राइस विल राइज, बट जो पैसा आपने लगा दिया, फॉर से 40 लाख आपने लगा दिया इस लैंड में, इसकी कोई फर्दर एक्टिविटी नहीं हो रही है, साइकिल ऑफ मनी साइकिल में कहीं यूटिलाइज नहीं हो रहा है. बट एट द सेम टाइम अगर यही 40 लाख आपके बैंक अकाउंट में रहता, सो थ्रू द मनी साइकिल it will create the capital formation and investments. So this was more good for economic activity, and this is not to an extent, although this is giving more prosperity to people, asset pricing बढ़ रही है, but at the same time economic activity के लिए ज़्यादा feasible है financial investments. And most important key point for you, in inflation the creditors lose and debtors gains. और सिंपल भाषा में बोलूँ तो जिसके पास पैसा रहेगा वो बेनिफिट में रहेगा और जिसने पैसा दिया होगा वो लॉस में रहेगा. ठीक, आगे there are certain measures of inflation. How inflation is being measured, that we need to understand. For that, GDP deflator is the most comprehensive one. GDP deflator shows the change of prices of all domestically produced final goods and services in an economy. ये आपको पता होना चाहिए, change in prices of all domestically produced. Then it is not based on fixed market of basket of goods and services, though it is a very comprehensive because ये हर level पे check कर रहा है एक तरीके से prices of commodities के increase में. Then there is cost of living index. This basket is traced for the price rise to check the affordability of people, whether the things are affordable for them or not. And the cost of living is the cost of maintaining such predefined standard of living. That is another aspect. Post this, the producer's price index, it sees the price at which the producer sells to the wholesaler. So increase at the level of producers, the price rise. So that will be producer's price index. And it measures the increase in prices of inputs like raw materials, wages, rupees, exchange rate, if imports are available. So we can say जो factors of production हैं उनके लेवल पे जो प्राइस राइज होता है, it counts that. Factors of production is like land, जो आप क्रेडिट लेते हैं वो, प्रॉफिट मार्जिन्स और एंटरप्रेन्योर्स का जो प्रॉफिट मार्जिन्स होता है वो, और क्रेडिट फैसिलिटी. सो 4 things are there in the factors of production: land, credit, wages and the profit margins. So these are the 4 major things into that. Then the 2 most important, the WPI, that says wholesale price index. At the level of wholesale, the rise in the price of goods, वो चीज़ है. 676 आइटम्स आते हैं, इसको हम और डिटेल में भी करेंगे. And the CPI, that is the consumer price index. With the consumer price index, it is the major change in the paid by consumers at the retail level. ठीक है, अब थोड़ा सा डिस्कस करते हैं. ये कुछ सर्टेन मेजरमेंट्स हैं जो हम लेते हैं इन्फ्लेशन को चेक करने के लिए इकोनॉमी में. यहाँ पे अब हम थोड़ी सी बात करेंगे जो मेजर इंपॉर्टेंट 2 मेजर्स हैं, CPI एंड WPI प्रॉपरली, दैट विल बी टॉकिंग अबाउट. सो कंज्यूमर प्राइस इंडेक्स, स्टेक होल्डर्स, रिटेलर्स एंड कस्टमर्स, 2 हैं स्टेक होल्डर्स आपके, रिटेलर्स एंड कस्टमर्स. 460 आइटम्स एंड लार्जेस्ट प्रोपोर्शन इज ऑफ फूड आइटम. दैट इज इंपॉर्टेंट की कॉन्टेक्स्ट फॉर यू. Post this, the CPI is being calculated, the urban, rural and combined by NSO, and CPI industrial worker, rural work laborer or agricultural labor by Labor Bureau, and the consumer food price index is calculated by NSO further. The base year is 2011 and 12. The methods utilized are point to point method and average 12 week, that is 52 weeks method, that is around 12 months. Then the WPI, wholesale price index. Stakeholders will be wholesaler and retailers. Out of that, the 676 items are in the basket, where the highest is from manufacturing items, that is 555. Furthermore, second is the primary articles and the third is fuel and power. WPI is being calculated by Office of Economic Advisor and the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. The base year is 2011 and 12, point to point, and 52 average week method is being utilized for this. And there is also WFPI, that is wholesale food price index, and based on that the food items or food articles in the primary and manufactured items are being calculated, the price rise is being calculated. So CPI में क्या करें, price rise calculate करें, WPI में भी price rise calculate करें, and based on that the inflation is being calculated at the level of wholesale and at the level of retail. And at the level of producers price index we have just discussed, and that is done at the at the stage of producers. Now consumer price index के बारे में बात की अभी हमने national level पे. This CPI for industrial worker, that shows the increase in cost of living of a worker. That is one aspect why this CPI for industrial worker is being taken off. This CPI for agriculture and rural labor is being taken to create or to estimate the minimum wages and Manrega wages for the laborers in the rural areas. Also the CPI rural urban and combined and CFPI rural urban and combined is being taken to estimate the retail inflation, headline inflation, food inflation and core inflation in the market. And with this becomes the CPI combined becomes the main measure which is being used by RBI as a source of retail inflation. So these are certain things which is done, and why it is done that we have just discussed. Apart from it, how this higher inflation can impact, that you need to understand. It discourages the saving aspect and investment aspect, diminishes the demand in the economy. If higher inflation is there, the demand will stick, people will have less demand of different commodities because larger chunk will go for a single commodity, and less economic activity will happen because people will have less money thing. Then the discourage exports bhi hoti hai because the prices of export will increase and this will lead to decrease in demand also. It acts as a hidden tax for say inflation, price rise हुआ, अब आपको ज़्यादा पैसा एक commodity के लिए खर्च करना होगा जो आप दूसरी commodity भी खरीदने में कर सकते थे. Apart from it, the fiscal deficit of government may go up because government takes sometimes suppressing stuffs to suppress down the inflation. So they need to put some amount as a subsidy part or other part to cut down the inflation. So that is also there. Apart from it, it is having adverse impact on the macroeconomic stability because agar inflation will be higher, so investment will go down. This will further act, economic activity will come down. So further the economic growth will also go down. So these are certain things which will be impacting. Now the last thing, not the least thing, that is inflation targeting. That is another scope of discussion. Inflation targeting is an explicit target with an agreement between RBI and government that shows the Reserve Bank of India has set an inflation target of 4% with a tolerance band of plus minus 2%. That is 4 plus minus 2%. This means that the RBI wants to keep inflation at 4% but will tolerate inflation between range of 2 to 6%. Furthermore, the Monetary Policy Committee, which you need to understand, you understand the inflation targeting aspect. Monetary Policy Committee is a 6-member committee where 3 are from RBI and 3 from the government recommendation, including the RBI governor will be there in the 3 members from RBI. The scope is flexible inflation targeting, that is the objective, that shows maintaining the price stability along with growth objective. Apart from it, the objective is framing of monetary policy is the Monetary Policy Committee. And now what are the objectives of monetary policy that you need to understand? With that, price stability is one thing, accelerating the growth of the economy is another thing, exchange rate stabilization, that exchange rates should be stabilized, बहुत volatility नहीं होनी चाहिए, that will also increase the problem in the market because market will be unstable to a larger extent. balancing saving and investments that are very much important for capital formation, generating employment, the capital formation will further increase the job opportunities and that will further help, and financial stability. So these are certain major things which are important from the monetary policy objective aspect. Then the challenges to monetary policy aspect, if we see, there are structural constraints. For example, price of transportation is high and due to that the prices are rising. Structural issue hai. Connectivity, storage and other issues are there. Cost of production due to less technologically advanced companies, that repo rate or monetary policy rate can't reduce the inflation in the economy because of that. Certain global external factors can also come forward. Lack of transmission at different levels, that is also there. For say लिक्विडिटी सरप्लस इशू था पिछले 2 साल में जिसकी वजह से एक प्रॉब्लम आ रही थी. लिक्विडिटी सरप्लस का मतलब हो गया बैंक आर हैविंग मोर लिक्विडिटी बट पीपल आर नॉट टेकिंग द लोन्स एंड अदर थिंग्स, दैट शोज कि डिमांड उतनी नहीं है. देन वीक क्रेडिट फैसिलिटी अवेलेबिलिटी एंड ऑल्सो banks are not feeling viable to give all the loans to other peoples, so that is another issue. Then exchange rate volatility, we have seen rupee has depreciated like anything. Apart from it, the global externalities are another such issues. For example, Russia-Ukraine war, that has further created the situation, a bad situation in the economy, because many prices, for example, sunflower oil ho gaya, fertilizer prices ho gaya, have gone up. This has led to increase in the prices of agricultural commodities. What should be way forward? First such thing is the monetary policy tools, where RBI can utilize the contractionary monetary policy, जहाँ पे रेपो रेट वगैरह इंक्रीज कर सकता है RBI. That is one thing. Apart from it, the fiscal policy measures, where government can take certain initiatives like tax increase करें और डायरेक्ट इम्पैक्ट डाले, सो डैट अगर कहीं होर्डिंग वगैरह हो रही है तो उसको वो कम कर सकते हैं. एंड फिजिकल पॉलिसी मेजर्स में दे कैन ऑल्सो डू रिड्यूसिंग द प्राइसेस ऑफ द कमोडिटीज सब्सिडाइज रेट पे प्रोड्यूस दे सकते हैं. एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव मेजर्स, जो मितव्ययिता के उपाय वगैरह होते हैं वो ऑस्टेरिटी मेजर्स जिसको हम कहते हैं. सप्लाई साइड मेजर्स में सप्लाई साइड जो कंस्ट्रेंट्स हैं उनको प्लग करने की बात. फॉर एग्जांपल लॉजिस्टिक्स एंड ट्रांसपोर्टेशन पे काम करें, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर अवेलेबिलिटी पे काम करें, सो डैट लॉन्गर रन में चीज़ें better possible हो सके. So these are certain measures which the RBI, government and other stakeholders can take. Now the last part, that is index of industrial production. This index of industrial production, why it is important, you need to understand. It is an indicator that measures the changes in volume of production in industrial products in a given period of time. मतलब वॉल्यूम ऑफ प्रोडक्शन जो इंडस्ट्रियल प्रोडक्ट्स का है उसमें जो चेंज आ रहा है उसकी बात कर रहे हैं, उनके कॉस्ट की बात कर रहे हैं. इट इज अ कंपोजिटिव इंडिकेटर that measures the growth rate of industry groups classified under 2 broad sectors, namely mining, manufacturing, electricity. Huge based sectors, namely basic goods हो गए, capital goods हो गए और intermediate goods हो गए. और इसमें सबसे ज़्यादा जो compromises हैं 8 core sectors का है, जो 40% से ज़्यादा आपके segment में weightage है. And these are refinery products at the highest, then electricity, then your steel, coal, crude oil, natural gas, cement and fertilizers. So these are certain things which are important from your perspective. Now the segment, why it is important? It is important because it helps in policy making, it helps in growth estimation of GDP, advanced estimation. So these are certain things where the industrial index of industrial production shows a better prospect of the economy to a larger extent. Post this, certain ASP points from the discussion you need to take care of, that is the inflation related key terms which we have just discussed in our segment, that you need to have with yourself. Its impacts, the positive and adverse impact aspect which you can better utilize in your answer making. The measurement of inflation from the prelims perspective, like the CPI, WPI, GDP deflator and other aspects. The monetary policy committee, its objectives, what are the challenges and way forward of the inflation targeting aspects, and that is from the mains perspective. and then the index of industrial production from prelims and mains perspective. So this makes this session complete. I hope the session was beneficial for you. Do join us on our YouTube platform on daily basis. It is an open initiative at NewsKase, and definitely it's going to benefit most of the aspirants who are actually looking for a solution to the current to static aspect. Thank you.